You suck at this. How could you ruin this deal for us? Find your own way back home. I do not care if you have to swim. The company should not pay for your failures. That was what my manager said to me in a polished Milan restaurant while his tie was stained with red wine and his dignity was somewhere under the table. I stood there with my laptop bag on one shoulder, my jaw tight enough to crack porcelain. Thienan looked at him the way women look at men when we are mentally invoicing them for every bad decision they have ever made. My name is Lila Hart. I was 26, a senior account executive at a software firm called Lucent Forge, and I had spent 6 months building a cross-border deal with an Italian manufacturing group named Belafort Systems. Our platform helps suppliers track inventory risk, payment cycles, and compliance bottlenecks across different countries. It was not glamorous. And it was useful. Useful makes money, and money gets dressed up as strategy in boardrooms. My manager, Ron Bex, liked to call himself a rainmaker. What he actually made was trouble with a corporate card. Before we flew out, Ron joked in the airport lounge that if I did not close the deal by any means necessary, I could find my own way home. I had smiled the way women smile when the room rewards male stupidity as leadership. I had made a note of it too. Always document the joke that carries a threat. In business, comedy is often just liability in a necktie. At the client dinner, I did everything right. I walked Belafort through our pricing tiers, localized rollout support, data hosting options for their European entities, and the clause package I had already prepared to address their concerns about vendor dependency. Their chief operating officer, Matteo Vian, was sharp, private, and cautious in the way serious buyers tend to be. And I respected him immediately. Then Ron began ordering more wine as if sobriety were a sign of weak character. He interrupted my answers, exaggerated implementation timelines, and at some point leaned toward Matteo's assistant, a composed woman named Bianca, and said her smile ought to be added as a line item in the contract because it was the only feature nobody could compete with. The air at the table changed. Bianca froze. Matteo set down his glass. I stepped in so quickly I nearly knocked my own knee against the table. I apologized to Bianca in clear, direct language. Then I turned to Matteo and said I understood if he wanted to end the evening, but I would be grateful for 10 minutes tomorrow to address any concern about our actual proposal, separate from conduct that did not reflect my professional standards. He studied me for one long beat, then stood. The dinner was over. Ron muttered something sloppy and smug behind me, but I was already moving. I followed Matteo out to the street, where the evening air cut through the smell of wine and humiliation. I did not beg. Begging is bad sales and worse self-respect. I told him 3 things. First, our software would cut reporting lag across vendors. Second, a bad manager did not erase a good product. Third, if Belafort preferred, I would come alone and bring revised contract language with performance guarantees, phased invoicing, MECN, and a termination clause that protected them if we missed implementation benchmarks. His expression shifted. Just slightly. He said he could meet the next day, sometime in the late morning at Belafort office. No manager. I thanked him, then walked back inside. Ron was smirking like a man who thought incompetence became power if he performed it confidently enough. When I told him I had secured another meeting, he sneered, delivered his little speech about swimming home, and laughed. I looked at him, then at the company card peeking from his wallet, then at the bartender who had heard every word. That was when I stopped trying to save the deal for Ron. I decided to save it for me. I left Ron at the restaurant with his wine, his ego, and his declining chance of continued employment. Outside, I leaned against the cool stone wall of the building and opened 3 things on my phone: my notes app, my expense log, and the emergency folder where I stored every email that had ever made my instincts itch. A woman in sales learns quickly that memory is useful, but documentation wins wars. I typed out the sequence while it was still fresh. Ron had made coercive remarks before travel. Ron had consumed enough alcohol to impair judgment during a client meeting. Ron had directed inappropriate comments at a client employee. Ron had told me the company would not pay for my return because of a failed deal he helped sabotage. I added the restaurant name, approximate timing, and names of witnesses I knew: Bianca, Matteo, and the bartender with the silver cuff bracelet. Then I checked our travel policy. That part was almost funny. Lucent Forge had a lovely little code of conduct full of proud language about respectful workplaces, anti-harassment protections, and safe travel standards for client-facing employees. It also had a reimbursement policy stating that when a manager created unsafe conditions during business travel, the employee could secure reasonable replacement accommodations and transport, then escalate to human resources and finance compliance. I smiled so hard it felt medicinal. Ron had spent months talking over me in meetings, taking credit for my pipeline, and reminding everyone that I was young enough to still believe effort mattered. He had confused my patience with weakness. That is a common male budgeting error. They underestimate the asset until it acquires legal structure. I booked a modest room near the client office, transferred my own flight home to the next day, and saved every receipt. Then I sent a concise email to myself from my work account summarizing the incident, with the subject line, "Client meeting disruption and travel safety concern. Time-stamped, preserved, beautiful." By sometime in the early morning, I was seated at a small hotel desk rewriting the Bellaforte proposal. If I wanted Matteo to trust me, I had to do more than apologize for a terrible manager. I had to show him I understood risk the way operators understand risk. Not as emotion, as exposure. I revised the agreement into a phased structure: limited pilot deployment first, payment attached to milestone completion, service credits if our support response times slipped, data processing obligations written in plain language instead of the usual corporate swamp fog. I even added a governance appendix recommending a quarterly review committee with one Belafort finance lead, one operations lead, and one Lucent Forge implementation specialist. Oversight is not glamorous either. It is still how grown women keep from being ambushed. At the Belafort office, Bianca met me in reception. She was cool but not hostile. I apologized again, directly and without excuses. She nodded once. That was enough. Matteo brought me into a glass-walled conference room overlooking a courtyard full of clipped hedges and expensive restraint. He did not offer coffee. Men deciding whether to trust you rarely offer coffee. So I began with terms. I showed him the revised rollout plan, the shortened commitment period, and the exit rights if we failed. I told him a vendor should be confident enough to be measured. So I also told him that any company worth doing business with should welcome a contract that punished bad performance instead of hiding it. That got his attention. He asked whether my leadership would approve terms that favored the client so clearly. I said, "My leadership has not had my sales record." He laughed. Bianca nearly smiled. For the next hour we negotiated line by line. He pushed on pricing. I held the annual number but gave him training seats and an extended implementation support window. He pushed on jurisdiction. I suggested neutral dispute language and executive mediation before formal action. He pushed on continuity if key personnel changed. That was when I understood what he was really asking. Could Belafort trust a company that sent Ron Becks? I met his gaze and said, "Trust the paper. Then trust the person who made sure the paper protected you." When the meeting ended, Matteo did not shake my hand right away. He signed the pilot letter first. Watching Matteo sign that pilot agreement felt better than revenge, which was inconvenient because I still wanted revenge. Not childish revenge. Not dramatic shoe throwing, drink splashing, hallway screaming revenge. I wanted the elegant kind, the kind that travels through policy, receipts, witness statements, and executive embarrassment. the kind that leaves a man unemployed and still confused about how the room stopped clapping for him. Matteo slid the signed letter across the table. Bianca passed me a clean copy. Then he said Belafort would move to full contract review if the pilot approval went through their internal finance committee by the end of the week. That was my opening. I asked whether he would be comfortable confirming, in writing, that the disruption the previous evening was caused by my manager and not by any misrepresentation of product capability on my part. I kept my tone neutral, almost bored. Ask for facts like they are ordinary, and people often hand them over. Matteo looked at Bianca. Bianca looked like a woman who had spent years watching mediocre men survive on volume. She said they would confirm what occurred. I thanked them, packed my laptop, and stepped out into the courtyard with the signed pilot letter tucked inside my folder like a blade in silk. Ron had left me 6 messages. The first 3 called me ungrateful. The next 2 asked where I was. The last one said I needed to hand over all client materials because he was taking over the account. I saved them all. Then I called Human Resources. Actually, I called Finance Compliance first. Human Resources protects the company. Finance Compliance protects the money. Money is more feared. I reported an unsafe travel incident, misuse of managerial authority, and client-facing misconduct that jeopardized an international contract. I mentioned the signed pilot letter only after the woman on the phone had gone quiet. Results make bureaucracies sit up straighter. She asked whether I had documentation. I nearly purred. By the time I reached my hotel, I had forwarded the receipts, my written account, the travel policy language, and screenshots of Ron messages. I also included a brief memo explaining financial exposure, potential lost contract value, reputational damage with a foreign client, and unauthorized threats to deny approved business travel reimbursement. Nothing sharpens executive attention like the phrase, unauthorized financial exposure. Ron arrived at the hotel lobby sometime in the afternoon, looking as if anger had been dry cleaned and pressed. He cornered me near the front desk and demanded the Belafort file. I said no. He lowered his voice and told me I worked for him. I said, for now. Then I asked the receptionist, in a voice sweet enough to rot fruit, whether there was somewhere private where I could continue a conversation that felt increasingly inappropriate. Ron stepped back so fast he nearly tripped on his own confidence. He hissed that I was ruining my career. That line always amuses me. Men build careers by setting fires, then accuse women of arson when we bring water. I went upstairs and drafted one more email, this time to our Chief Revenue Officer, Aita Wynne. Aita had built the European division and possessed the rare executive talent of recognizing useful people before louder people buried them. I kept the message clean. Belafort pilot secured. Managerial misconduct documented. Compliance already notified. Full account details attached. She replied before evening. 3 sentences. Do not return with Ron. Keep the client. Meet me when you land. I stared at the screen and laughed into the quiet room. Then I called my mother, who had raised me on 2 principles. Always read what you sign, and never let a fool narrate your life. She listened, silent for a while, then said, good. Now finish the deal and bury him under paperwork. I slept better than I had in months, not because justice had arrived, because it had booked a flight and was on its way. The next day, Belafort sent over their redlined draft, and it was glorious. I say glorious because a clean contract fight is one of the few pleasures adulthood offers without adding sugar or jail time. Matteo team had sharpened every commercial term: liability caps, implementation warranties, data transfer controls, renewal mechanics, payment schedule, change order rules. It was the language of serious people trying not to be cheated. I respected that. Too many women are trained to treat negotiation like a personality test. Smile more, push less, Be agreeable while protecting yourself from predatory nonsense. It is exhausting and bad for profit. Negotiation is not a charm contest. It is simply a written record of who carries risk when life behaves like life. I marked my responses carefully. On pricing, I held firm on the software fee but spread onboarding costs across milestones. On liability, I would not accept unlimited exposure, but I carved out stronger obligations for confidentiality breaches and intentional misconduct. On termination, I gave them a clean exit if we missed implementation deadlines after notice and cure. On renewals, I struck the sneaky auto-escalation language our legal team liked to tuck into multi-year deals, as if clients were too tired to read page 14. People call that standard practice. I call it how trust dies wearing formal shoes. By sometime in the late afternoon, I was back at Belafort finalizing terms. Matteo reviewed the last draft with the concentration of a surgeon. Bianca sat beside him, occasionally lifting one eyebrow whenever a clause smelled like corporate perfume sprayed over a trap. We finished with only 2 live issues left. I solved both by narrowing service scope instead of overpromising. Young salespeople are often taught to say yes and let implementation suffer later. That is how commissions get paid and lawsuits get invited. I preferred a smaller promise that survived contact with reality. Matteo signed the full agreement. Not a pilot. And the whole contract. It was the largest deal of my career. He stood, offered his hand, and said Belafort had chosen me as much as the product. Bianca added that next time I should bring fewer liabilities and more women. I told her that sounded like a management framework I could support. Then my phone rang. Aita. Her voice was brisk. Ron had been removed from all client communications pending investigation. I was authorized to return home on revised business travel. She wanted every detail in person, including any witness names and prior incidents. She also asked one question that told me everything I needed to know. Did Ron ever interfere with commission attribution? I looked out through the conference room glass into the courtyard and smiled slowly. Yes, I said. Repeatedly. Now, here is where the story becomes especially satisfying. I had receipts for that too. Months earlier, Ron had redirected 2 accounts I sourced into joint credit structures after the deals were effectively done, reducing my commission and padding his own numbers. At the time, I told myself it was politics. Women are encouraged to mistake theft for culture if the man stealing from us uses spreadsheet language. Not anymore. I forwarded Ada the account histories, internal messages, and revision trails showing where ownership had shifted after deal stage lock. That is the lovely thing about modern systems. Men lie, metadata sighs, and tells the truth. At the airport the next morning, Ron was nowhere near my gate. I learned later that compliance had canceled his return booking and rerouted him through legal review before reimbursement, which, I must say, was almost poetic. The man who told me to swim home had ended up stranded by his own expense trail. On the flight back, I did not celebrate. Not yet. Winning one contract is a moment. Changing who gets believed is a strategy. I landed, walked into headquarters with my carry-on and my signed agreement, and met Ada in a glass office overlooking the sales floor. She took the Belafort contract, glanced at the total value, and then looked up at me. Well, she said, this is going to be expensive. I asked whether she meant the client discount. She smiled. No, I mean Ron. Ada did not waste words, which is one reason I liked her. Another was that she did not confuse female composure with a lack of appetite. She spent the morning with me in a conference room, walking through every piece of evidence: the dinner, the remarks, the travel threat, the witness names, the commission shifts, the voice messages, the account ownership changes. She asked precise questions the way good lawyers do, though technically she was not legal. In corporate life, And the sharpest people often collect skills because relying on one department is how disasters grow roots. By sometime in the early afternoon, legal joined us, then compliance, then an executive from finance. I noticed something immediately. Nobody asked whether I might have misunderstood Ron humor. Nobody suggested he was under pressure. Nobody asked what I could have done differently to prevent a drunk man from detonating his own career in public. They had seen the contract I brought home. Performance is not morality, but it does make organizations listen harder. Within days, Ron was suspended. Soon after, he was gone. Officially, I was told only that the company had concluded its review and taken appropriate action. Unofficially, Ada informed me that threatening an employee abroad, harassing a client representative, and manipulating commission records had created what she called an indefensible pattern. I appreciated the phrase. It sounded expensive. The better part came after. Ada moved the Belafort account fully under my control and promoted me into a director track role focused on European partnerships. My commission was recalculated on the deals Ron had diluted. The back pay hit my account like justice with routing numbers. I used part of it for something Ron would never have understood. I hired an estate planning attorney. Not because I was wealthy enough for mahogany panic, but because women who earn well should learn early how to shield assets before life gets inventive. I set up a revocable trust, updated beneficiary designations, created medical and financial powers, and opened a separate brokerage account in my own name with automatic monthly contributions. Boring, strategic, life-changing. Men have long been told that power means acquisition. Women should be taught that power also means structure. I also kept a private rule after Milan. Never travel for work without independent funds, a copy of policy terms, and control over my own return booking. Dependence is too often sold as teamwork until the bill arrives. A month later, Belafort launched the first phase of our system. Matteo sent a concise note praising the rollout plan. Bianca sent a better one. She wrote that it was refreshing to work with a woman who negotiated like she had read both the contract and the room. I framed that email in my mind forever. As for Ron, and I heard scraps. He was consulting, which is corporate language for explaining your own collapse at premium hourly rates. I did not chase more. Revenge is sweetest when it does not need a sequel. Sometimes younger women at Lucent Forge ask me how I handled Milan so calmly. I tell them calm is often just preparation wearing lipstick. Read the policy before the trip. Keep your own records. Negotiate what happens when things go wrong, not just when they go right. Never let anyone push you into vagueness when paper can protect you. And when a fool with a title mistakes your professionalism for obedience, let him. Then hand him the invoice. I still remember standing outside that restaurant, furious and humiliated, with the city humming around me and my manager trying to maroon me with his contempt. He thought he was deciding whether I got home. What he was really deciding was whether I would return as his employee or as the woman who replaced him. And it turned out I came back as both the closer and the cautionary tale, and I did not have to swim.